Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are on Section 4 of Book 3 of The Will to Power, and this section is entitled The Will to Power in Art, and we are up to Aphorism 794. Our religion, morality, and philosophy are decadent human institutions. The counteragent, art. 795. The artist-philosopher. A higher concept of art. Can man stand at so great a distance from his fellows as to mold them? Preliminary exercises thereto. 1. To become a self-former, an anchorite. 2. To do what artists have done hitherto, i.e., to reach a small degree of perfection in a certain medium. 796. Art as it appears without the artist, i.e., as a body, an organization, the Prussian Officers' Corps, the Order of the Jesuits. To what extent is the artist merely a preliminary stage? The world regarded as a self-generating work of art. 797. The phenomenon artist is the easiest to see through. From it one can look down upon the fundamental instincts of power, of nature, etc., even of religion and morality. Quote-unquote play, uselessness, as the ideal of him who is overflowing with power, as the ideal of the childishness of God, a child playing. 798. Apollonian, Dionysian. There are two conditions in which art manifests itself in man even as a force of nature, and disposes of him whether he consent or not. It may be as a constraint to visionary states, or it may be an orgiastic impulse. Both conditions are to be seen in normal life, but they are then somewhat weaker, in dreams and in moments of elation or intoxication. But the same contrast exists between the dream state and the state of intoxication. Both of these states let loose all manner of artistic powers within us, but each unfetters power of a different kind. Dreamland gives us the power of vision, of association, of poetry. Intoxication gives us the power of grand attitudes, of passion, of song, and of dance. 799. Sexuality and voluptuousness belong to the Dionysiac intoxication, but neither of them is lacking in the Apollonian state. There is also a difference of tempo between the states. The extreme peace of certain feelings of intoxication, or more strictly the slackening of the feeling of time, and the reduction of the feeling of space, is wont to reflect itself in the vision of the most restful attitudes and states of the soul. The classical style essentially represents repose, simplification, foreshortening, and concentration. The highest feeling of power is concentrated in the classical type. To react with difficulty, great consciousness, no feeling of strife. 800. The feeling of intoxication is, as a matter of fact, equivalent to a sensation of surplus power. It is strongest in seasons of rut, new organs, new accomplishments, new colors, new forms. Embellishment is an outcome of increased power. Embellishment is merely an expression of a triumphant will, of an increased state of coordination, of a harmony of all the strong desires of an infallible and perpendicular equilibrium. Logical and geometrical simplification is the result of an increase of power. Conversely, the mere aspect of such a simplification increases the sense of power in the beholder, the zenith of development, the grand style. Ugliness signifies the decadence of a type, contradiction and faulty coordination among the inmost desires. This means a decline in the organizing power, or, psychologically speaking, in the will. The condition of pleasure, which is called intoxication, is really an exalted feeling of power. Sensations of space and time are altered. Inordinate distances are traversed by the eye, and only then become visible. The extension of the vision over greater masses and expanses, the refinement of the organ which apprehends the smallest and most elusive things, divination, the power of understanding at the slightest hint, at the smallest suggestion, intelligent sensitiveness, strength as a feeling of dominion in the muscles, as agility and love of movement, as dance, as levity and quick time, strength as the love of proving strength, as bravado, adventurousness, fearlessness, indifference in regard to life and death. All these elated moments of life stimulate each other. The world of images and of imagination of one suffices as a suggestion for the other. In this way, states finally merge into each other, which might do better to keep apart, such as the feeling of religious intoxication and sexual irritability, two very profound feelings, always wonderfully coordinated. What is it that pleases almost all pious women, old or young? Answer: a saint with beautiful legs, still young, still innocent. Cruelty and tragedy and pity likewise normally correlated. Springtime, dancing, music, all these things are but the display of one sex before the other, as also that infinite yearning of the heart, peculiar to Faust. Artists, when they are worth anything at all, are men of strong propensities, even physically, with surplus energy, powerful animals, sensual, without a certain overheating of the sexual system. A man like Raphael is unthinkable. To produce music is also in a sense to produce children. Chastity is merely the economy of the artist, and in all creative artists productiveness certainly ceases with sexual potency. Artists should not see things as they are. They should see them fuller, simpler, stronger. To this end, however, a kind of youthfulness, of vernality, a sort of perpetual elation must be peculiar to their lives. 801. The states in which we transfigure things and make them fuller, and rhapsodize about them until they reflect our own fullness and love of life back upon us, sexuality, intoxication, postprandial states, spring, triumph over our enemies, scorn, bravado, cruelty, the ecstasy of religious feeling. But three elements above all are active: sexuality, intoxication, cruelty. All these belong to the oldest festal joys of mankind. They also preponderate in budding artists. Conversely, there are things with which we meet which already show us this transfiguration and fullness, and the animal world's response thereto is a state of excitement in the spheres where these states of happiness originate. A blending of these very delicate shades of animal well-being and desires is the aesthetic state. The latter only manifests itself in those natures which are capable of that spendthrift and overflowing fullness of bodily vigor. The latter is always the primum mobile. The sober-minded man, the tired man, the exhausted and dried-up man, e.g. the scholar, can have no feeling for art, because he does not possess the primitive force of art, which is the tyranny of inner riches. He who cannot give away anything cannot feel anything either. Quote-unquote perfection. In these states, more particularly in the case of sexual love, there is an ingenuous betrayal of what the profoundest instinct regards as the highest, the most desirable, the most valuable, the ascending movement of its type, also of the condition towards which it is actually striving. Perfection, the extraordinary expansion of this instinct's feeling of power, its riches, its necessary overflowing of all banks. 802. Art reminds us of states of physical vigor. It may be the overflow and bursting forth of blooming life in the world of pictures and desires. On the other hand, it may be an excitation of the physical functions by means of pictures and desires of exalted life, an enhancement of the feeling of life, the latter stimulant. To what extent can ugliness exercise this power? Insofar as it may communicate something of the triumphant energy of the artist who has become master of the ugly and the repulsive, or insofar as it gently excites our lust of cruelty, in some circumstances even the lust of doing no harm to ourselves, self-violence, and therewith the feeling of power over ourselves. 803. Beauty, therefore, is, to the artist, something which is above all order of rank, because in beauty contrasts are overcome, the highest sign of power thus manifesting itself in the conquest of opposites. and achieved without a feeling of tension, violence being no longer necessary, everything submitting and obeying so easily, and doing so with good grace. This is what delights the powerful will of the artist. 804. The biological value of beauty and ugliness. That which we feel instinctively opposed to us aesthetically is, according to the longest experience of mankind, felt to be harmful, dangerous, and worthy of suspicion. The sudden utterance of the aesthetic instinct, e.g., in the case of loathing, implies an act of judgment. To this extent, beauty lies within the general category of the biological values, usefulness, beneficent, and life-promoting. Thus, a host of stimuli which for ages have been associated with and remind us of useful things and conditions give us the feeling of beauty, i.e., the increase of the feeling of power, not only things, therefore, but the sensations which are associated with such things, or their symbols. In this way, beauty and ugliness are recognized as determined by our most fundamental self-preservative values. Apart from this, it is nonsense to postulate anything as beautiful or ugly. Absolute beauty exists just as little as absolute goodness and truth. In a particular case, it is a matter of the self-preservative conditions of a certain type of man. Thus, the gregarious man will have quite a different feeling for beauty from the exceptional or superman. It is the optics of things in the foreground which only consider immediate consequences, from which the value beauty, also goodness and truth, arises. All instinctive judgments are short-sighted in regard to the concatenation of consequences. They merely advise what must be done forthwith. Reason is essentially an obstructing apparatus, preventing the immediate response to instinctive judgments. It halts, it calculates, it traces the chain of consequences further. Judgments concerning beauty and ugliness are short-sighted. Reason is always opposed to them. But they are convincing in the highest degree. They appeal to our instincts, in that quarter where the latter decide most quickly and say yes or no with least hesitation, even before reason can interpose. The most common affirmations of beauty stimulate each other reciprocally. Whether the aesthetic impulse once begins to work, a whole host of other and foreign perfections crystallize around the particular form of beauty. It is impossible to remain objective. It is certainly impossible to dispense with the interpreting, bestowing, transfiguring, and poeticizing power. The latter is a stringing together of affirmations concerning beauty itself. The sight of a beautiful woman. Thus, 1. Judgment concerning beauty is short-sighted. It sees only the immediate consequences. 2. It smothers the object which gives rise to it with a charm that is determined by the association of various judgments concerning beauty, which, however, are quite alien to the essence of the particular object. To regard a thing as beautiful is necessarily to regard it falsely. That is why, incidentally, love marriages are from the social point of view the most unreasonable form of matrimony. 805. Concerning the genesis of art. That making perfect and seeing perfect, which is peculiar to the cerebral system overladen with sexual energy. A lover alone with his sweetheart at eventide transfigures the smallest details. Life is a chain of sublime things. The misfortune of an unhappy love affair is more valuable than anything else. On the other hand, everything perfect and beautiful operates like an unconscious recollection of that amorous condition and of the point of view peculiar to it. All perfection and the whole of the beauty of things, through contiguity, revives aphrodisiac bliss. Physiologically, it is the creative instinct of the artist and the distribution of his semen in his blood. The desire for art and beauty is an indirect longing for the ecstasy of sexual desire, which gets communicated to the brain. The world becomes perfect through love. 806. Sensuality in its various disguises. 1. As idealism, Plato, common to youth, constructing a kind of concave mirror in which the image of the beloved is an incrustation, an exaggeration, a transfiguration, an attribution of infinity to everything. 2. In the religion of love, a fine young man, a beautiful woman, in some way divine, a bridegroom, a bride of the soul. 3. In art as a decorating force, e.g., just as the man sees the woman and makes her a present of everything that can enhance her personal charm, so the sensuality of the artist adorns an object with everything else that he honors and esteems, and by this means perfects it, or idealizes it. Woman, knowing what man feels in regard to her, tries to meet his idealizing endeavors halfway by decorating herself, by walking and dancing well, by expressing delicate thoughts. In addition, she may practice modesty, shyness, reserve, prompted by her instinctive feeling that the idealizing power of man increases with all this. In the extraordinary finesse of woman's instincts, modesty must not be by any means considered as conscious hypocrisy. She guesses that it is precisely artlessness and real shame which seduces man most and urges him to an exaggerated esteem of her. On this account, woman is ingenuous, owing to the subtlety of her instincts, which reveal to her the utility of a state of innocence. A willful closing of one's eyes to oneself. Wherever dissembling has a stronger influence by being unconscious, it actually becomes unconscious. 807. What a host of things can be accomplished by the state of intoxication which is called by the name of love, and which is something else besides love. And yet everybody has his own experience of the matter. The muscular strength of a girl suddenly increases as soon as a man comes into her presence. There are instruments with which this can be measured. In the case of a still closer relationship of the sexes, as for instance in dancing and in other amusements which society gatherings entail, this power increases to such an extent as to make real feats of strength possible. At last, no one longer trusts either one's eye or one's watch. Here, at all events, we must reckon with the fact that dancing itself, like every form of rapid movement, involves a kind of intoxication of the whole nervous, muscular, and visceral system. We must therefore reckon in this case with the collective effects of double intoxication, and how clever it is to be a little off your head at times. There are some realities which we cannot admit even to ourselves, especially when we are women and having all sorts of feminine pudeurs. Those young creatures dancing over there are obviously beyond all reality. They are dancing only with a host of tangible ideals. What is more, they even see ideals sitting around them, their mothers. An opportunity for quoting Faust. They look incomparably fairer, do these pretty creatures, when they have lost their head a little, and how well they know it too. They are even more delightful because they know it. Lastly, it is their finery which inspires them. Their finery is their third little intoxication. They believe in their dressmaker as in their God. And who could destroy this faith in them? Blessed is the faith, and self-admiration is healthy. Self-admiration can protect one even from cold. Has a beautiful woman who knew she was well-dressed ever caught cold? Never yet on this earth. I even suppose a case in which she has scarcely a rag on her. 808. If one should require the most astonishing proof of how far the power of transfiguring, which comes of intoxication, goes, this proof is at hand in the phenomenon of love, or what is called love in all the languages and silences of the world. Intoxication works to such a degree upon reality in this passion that in the consciousness of the lover the cause of his love is quite suppressed, and something else seems to take its place, a vibration and a glitter of all the charm mirrors of Circe. In this respect, to be man or an animal makes no difference, and still less does spirit, goodness, or honesty. If one is astute, one is befooled astutely. If one is thick-headed, one is befooled in a thick-headed way. But love, even the love of God, saintly love, quote, the love that saves the soul, end quote, are at bottom all one. They are nothing but a fever which has reasons to transfigure itself, a state of intoxication which does well to lie about itself. And at any rate, when the man loves, he is a good liar about himself and to himself. He seems to himself transfigured, stronger, richer, more perfect. He is more perfect. Art here acts as an organic function. We find it present in the most angelic instinct, love. We find it as the greatest stimulus of life. Thus art is sublimely utilitarian, even in the fact that it lies. But we should be wrong to halt at its power to lie. It does more than merely imagine. It actually transposes values. And it not only transposes the feeling for values. The lover actually has a greater value. He is stronger. In animals, this condition gives rise to new weapons, colors, pigments, and forms, and above all to new movements, new rhythms, new love calls and seductions. In man it is just the same. His whole economy is richer, mightier, and more complete when he is in love than when he is not. The lover becomes a spendthrift. He is rich enough for it. He now dares. He becomes an adventurer, and even a donkey in magnanimity and innocence. His belief in God and in virtue revives, because he believes in love. Moreover, such idiots of happiness acquire wings and new capacities, and even the door to art is open to them. If we cancel the suggestion of this intestinal fever from the lyric of tones and words, what is left to poetry and music? L'art pour l'art, perhaps. The professional cant of frogs, shivering outside in the cold, and dying of despair in their swamp. Everything else was created by love. 809. All art works like a suggestion on the muscles and the senses which were originally active in the ingenuous artistic man. Its voice is only heard by artists. It speaks to this kind of man whose constitution is attuned to such subtlety and sensitiveness. The concept layman is a misnomer. The deaf man is not a subdivision of the class whose ears are sound. All art works as a tonic. It increases strength. It kindles desire, i.e., the feeling of strength. It excites all the more subtle recollections of intoxication. There is actually a special kind of memory which underlies such states. A distant, fitful world of sensations here returns to being. Ugliness is the contradiction of art. It is that which art excludes, the negation of art. Wherever decline, impoverishment of life, impotence, decomposition, dissolution are felt, however remotely, the aesthetic man reacts with his no. Ugliness depresses. It is the sign of depression. It robs strength. It impoverishes. It weighs down. Ugliness suggests repulsive things. From one state of health, one can test how an indisposition may increase one's power of fancying ugly things. One's selection of things, interests, and questions become different. Logic provides a state which is next of kin to ugliness, heaviness, bluntness. In the presence of ugliness, equilibrium is lacking in a mechanical sense. Ugliness limps and stumbles, the direct opposite of the godly agility of the dancer. The aesthetic state represents an overflow of means of communication, as well as a condition of extreme sensibility to stimuli and signs. It is the zenith of communion and transmission between living creatures. It is the source of languages. In it, languages, whether of signs, sounds, or glances, have their birthplace. The richer phenomenon is always the beginning. Our abilities are subtilized forms of richer abilities. But even today, we still listen with our muscles. We even read with our muscles. Every mature art possesses a host of conventions as a basis, insofar as it is a language. Convention is a condition of great art, not an obstacle to it. Every elevation of life likewise elevates the power of communication, as also the understanding of man. The power of living in other people's souls originally had nothing to do with morality, but with a physiological irritability of suggestion. Sympathy, or what is called altruism, is merely a product of that psychomotor relationship which is reckoned as spirituality. Psychomotor induction, says Charles Ferrer. People never communicate a thought to one another. They communicate a movement, an imitative sign which is then interpreted as a thought. 8.10. Compared with music, communication by means of words is a shameless mode of procedure. Words reduce and stultify. Words make impersonal. Words make common that which is uncommon. 8:11. It is exceptional states that determine the artist. Such states as are all intimately related and entwined with morbid symptoms, so that it would seem almost impossible to be an artist without being ill. The physiological conditions which in the artist become molded into a personality, and which to a certain degree may attach themselves to any man. 1. Intoxication, the feeling of enhanced power, the inner compulsion to make things a mirror of one's own fullness and perfection. 2. The extreme sharpness of certain senses, so that they are capable of understanding a totally different language of signs, and to create such a language. This is a condition which manifests itself in some nervous diseases. Extreme susceptibility, out of which great powers of communion are developed. The desire to speak on the part of everything that is capable of making signs. A need of being rid of oneself by means of gestures and attitudes. The ability of speaking about oneself in 100 different languages. In fact, a state of explosion. One must first imagine this condition as one in which there is a pressing and compulsory desire of ridding oneself of the ecstasy of a state of tension, by all kinds of muscular work and movement. Also as an involuntary coordination of these movements with inner processes, images, thoughts, desires, as a kind of automatism of the whole muscular system under the compulsion of strong stimuli acting from within. The inability to resist reaction, the apparatus of resistance is also suspended. Every inner movement, feeling, thought, emotion is accompanied by vascular changes, and consequently by changes in color, temperature, and secretion. The suggestive power of music, its suggestion mentale. 3. The compulsion to imitate. Extreme irritability, by means of which a certain example becomes contagious, a condition is guessed and represented merely by means of a few signs. A complete picture is visualized by one's inner consciousness, and its effect soon shows itself in the movement of the limbs, in a certain suspension of the will, Schopenhauer, a sort of blindness and deafness towards the external world. The realm of admitted stimuli is sharply defined. This differentiates the artist from the layman, from the spectator of art. The latter reaches the height of his excitement in the mere act of apprehending, the former in giving, and in such a way that the antagonism between these two gifts is not only natural, but even desirable. Each of these states has an opposite standpoint. To demand of the artist that he should have the point of view of the spectator, of the critic, is equivalent to asking him to impoverish his creative power. In this respect, the same differences holds good as that which exists between the sexes. One should not ask the artist who gives to become a woman to receive. Our aesthetics have hitherto been women's aesthetics, inasmuch as they have only formulated the experiences of what is beautiful from the point of view of the receivers in art. In the whole of philosophy hitherto, the artist has been lacking, i.e., as we have already suggested, a necessary fault. For the artist, who would begin to understand himself, would therewith begin to mistake himself. He must not look backwards, he must not look at all. He must give. It is an honor for an artist to have no critical faculty. If he can criticize, he is mediocre, he is modern. 8:12. Here I lay down a series of psychological states as signs of flourishing and complete life, which today we are in the habit of regarding as morbid. But by this time we have broken ourselves of the habit of speaking of healthy and morbid as opposites. The question is one of degree. What I maintain on this point is that what people call healthy nowadays represents a lower level of that which under favorable circumstances actually would be healthy, that we are relatively sick. The artist belongs to a much stronger race. That which in us would be harmful and sickly is natural in him. But people object to this, that it is precisely the impoverishment of the machine which renders this extraordinary power of comprehending every kind of suggestion possible, e.g., our hysterical females. An overflow of spunk and energy may quite as well lead to symptoms of partial constraint, sense hallucinations, peripheral sensitiveness, as a poor vitality does. The stimuli are differently determined. The effect is the same. What is not the same is above all the ultimate result. The extreme torpidity of all morbid natures, after their nervous eccentricities, has nothing in common with the states of the artist, who need in no wise repent his best moments. He is rich enough for it all. He can squander without becoming poor. Just as we now feel justified in judging genius as a form of neurosis, we may perhaps think the same of artistic suggestive power. And our artists are, as a matter of fact, only too closely related to hysterical females. This, however, is only an argument against the present day, and not against artists in general. The inartistic states are objectivity, reflection, suspension of the will. Schopenhauer's scandalous misunderstanding consisted in regarding art as a mere bridge to the denial of life. The inartistic states are those which impoverish, which subtract, which bleach, under which life suffers. The Christian. 813. The modern artist, who in his physiology is next of kin to the hysteric, may also be classified as a character belonging to this state of morbidness. The hysteric is false. He lies from the love of lying. He is admirable in all the arts of dissimulation, unless his morbid vanity hoodwink him. This vanity is like a perpetual fever which is in need of stupefying drugs, and which recoils from no self-deception and no farce that promises it the most fleeting satisfaction. The incapacity for pride and the need of continual revenge for his deep-rooted self-contempt, this is almost the definition of this man's vanity. The absurd irritability of his system, which makes a crisis out of every one of his experiences and sees dramatic elements in the most insignificant occurrences of life, deprives him of all calm reflection. He ceases from being a personality. At most, he is a rendezvous of personalities, of which first one and then the other asserts itself, with barefaced assurance. Precisely on this account, he is great as an actor. All these poor, will-less people, whom doctors study so profoundly, astound one through their virtuosity in mimicking and transfiguration, and their assumption of almost any character required. 814. Artists are not men of great passion, despite all their assertions to the contrary, both to themselves and to others, and for the following two reasons. They lack all shyness towards themselves, they watch themselves live, they spy upon themselves, they are much too inquisitive. And they also lack shyness in the presence of passion. As artists, they exploit it. Secondly, however, that vampire, their talent, generally forbids them such an expenditure of energy as passion demands. A man who has a talent is sacrificed to that talent. He lives under the vampirism of his talent. A man does not get rid of his passion by reproducing it, but rather he is rid of it if he is able to reproduce it. Goethe teaches the reverse, but it seems as though he deliberately misunderstood himself here, from a sense of delicacy. This is the end of Part 9 of Book 3 of The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. Thank you for listening.